welcome for this webinar on rabies. I'd like to introduce to you the community manager Perrine and Guilherme, and I'll thank them for getting your questions, and we'll also have questions during the talk, and I'll let you, Perrine and Guilherme, introduce rabies webinar.
Thank you very much. We are pleased to welcome you to this webinar that aims to address your questions about the MOOC Rabies organized by the Pasteur Network. First, we would like to thank you for having taken the course and for attending the webinar today. This MOOC dedicated to rabies was launched in November 2022, and almost 1,900 trainees from more than 100 countries are already registered, mostly from France, India, Philippines, and many African countries. We are now approaching the end of the broadcasting of the MOOC and decided to organize this webinar to have a closer interaction with you. This represents an opportunity for the directors of the MOOC, Professor Hervé and Professor Noël Tordo, to directly answer your questions from the MOOC forum.
And it's also possible for you to ask your question in live in the Q&A, the question and answer of the Zoom. And some of them may also be selected for our speakers to answer in live. And also remember, if needed, you can also write your question directly in French or in Portuguese, and you can translate them to Hervé and Noël. And we may now invite Professor Hervé Bourhy and Professor Noël Tordo to briefly introduce themselves, and then we move to on the question sessions. Please, Noël.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm Noël Tordo. I'm working in rabies, on rabies since 1982. It's a long time ago. Essentially on molecular biology at the beginning with sequencing of the first genomes, then molecular epidemiology, virus-host interactions, vaccine and antivirals, different aspects. I was also working on viral hemorrhagic fevers in virology, and this is the reason why I was sent to Africa to build an institute here, Institut Pasteur de Guinée, where you are with me here. And when you go to Guinea, you are really going on the basis of rabies, and we are in the early age of control of rabies here in Guinea. So that's interesting because I went in Parize where we were doing molecular biology of understanding how the virus is dialoguing with the host, up to the place now where we need really to use this knowledge to help controlling rabies.
Thank you, Noël. Hervé?
So good morning or good evening to all of you, and thank you for joining us for this webinar of rabies. I'm very pleased and honored to be with you today. So my name is Hervé Bourhy. I'm working at Pasteur Institute in Paris. I'm heading the National Reference Center of Rabies here in France, which is in charge of the rabies surveillance in humans and in most of the animal cases. We are running also the WHO Reference Center for Rabies and a research unit working on different aspects of rabies that I will detail you a little bit further. So we are a team, and by the way, Perrine and Guilherme are members of the unit Lysavirus epidemiology and neuropathology that I am heading to. So what are our activities? So we are working on the pathogenesis and some molecular aspects of rabies when rabies virus crosses the species barrier to see the host immune response. We are developing therapy for rabies. We are involved in the management of patients and on the shortening of the rabies post-exposure prophylaxis, for example, as this is one of our main recent achievements. We are involved in many research activities with different countries all over the world. mainly in Africa and Asia, but not only. We are dealing with some projects in America too. These research activities are mainly what I will call operational research that are performed in close collaboration with the local authorities and institutions there to try to help them, and it's part of our missions as a WHOCC, to help them to really strengthen their surveillance system, improve the accessibility of the patients to the post-exposure prophylaxis, and overall have a global overview of the burden of rabies, to sensibilize the politicians and all the communities to the risk regarding rabies in the different countries in which we are working. So I'm very pleased to be here with you and to answer to your question. And thank you again to Clementine, Cécile, Perrine, and Guilherme for helping us to organize this webinar.
Thank you, Hervé. Now we're going to start the questions session, and we have received your questions through the inscription form of this webinar. We classify them in 6 different categories. And let's start with the questions related to reservoirs and vectors of the rabies virus. And if I can ask the first question for Noël and Hervé, it's about birds. And are birds reservoirs or vectors of rabies?
The answer is no. The answer is no, even if rabies is a rhabdovirus. And if you are looking, rhabdoviruses are all over the world, and all over you can find rhabdoviruses in plants. I'm sure that there are some rhabdoviruses circulating in birds, but they are not provoking rabies.
Thank you. And the second one is about monkeys. It's a question from France. What do we know about the epidemiology of rabies in monkeys in Asia and Africa, especially in touristic places like a monkey forest or monkey beach?
Hervé, let's go.
Yeah, maybe this is for me. This is typically a question from people from the Western side, and recognize the question coming from France. So we have a lot of patients coming back from these touristic places, monkey forest, monkey beach, where tourists can really be in close contact with monkeys, and sometimes these monkeys store the food they are carrying with them, and at this occasion they are severely beaten. So we have to deal with a lot of these people coming back from these countries, beaten and asking for post-exposure prophylaxis, and this is one of the big issue here in the anti-rabies clinics in the Western world. So what is the epidemiology of rabies in these monkeys? So, monkeys are susceptible hosts, so they can be infected by dogs, fighting with dogs. So for sure, they can be vector of rabies. So there are some cases that have been described. Probably the incidence of rabies in monkeys is quite limited, but we cannot forget it or avoid it. So the recommendations for the tourist people is to take care of these monkeys when they are visiting such touristic places where they are in close contact with monkeys, and to certainly not carry food, because this attracts these monkeys, and at this occasion they can be beaten. And if they are beaten, really the recommendation is as soon as they are beaten to ask for post-exposure prophylaxis, as we cannot rule out the possibility of monkeys being infected. Although some of these farms are really very well closed and have no contact with the outside, so it should be really discussed case by case if post-exposure prophylaxis is needed or not, and if we have a good notion that the monkeys are really there for quite a long time and have no contact with other population outside of the farm, then we could discuss the interest or not of the post-exposure prophylaxis. But this is difficult to know.
If I can just add something, since the beginning of this year, in Guinea, we had approximately 7 cases of people bitten by a monkey, essentially expatriate going to the forest, looking at monkeys, playing with them, and exactly in the conditions that Hervé said. And after a phone call, and frequently we have very few information, and we are forced to push people which is a big problem in Guinea because you do not find vaccine everywhere.
Okay, if you change animal species and talk about bats, and the question was about the bats being health carriers of Lassa viruses, and more precisely, do you have information on the proportion of asymptomatic versus symptomatic infection in bats? Do bats are sick? Did they get sick on rabies or not?
Typically the topic of Hervé.
Maybe I can. So we have done some work on longitudinal survey of bat colonies, mainly in Spain, in Catalonia, in Balearic Islands, and North Africa, and French Guiana. So we are able to see regular passages of viruses in the colonies from years to years, with so an increase in the rate of seroconversions, so the percentage of bats that show antibodies against rabies. Then after a few years, this percentage is declining again, and we can see another rise of antibodies after a few years due to probably the coming back of the virus. We were able to ban these bats, so it means that either we put an identification of the bats or a microchip that allow us really to identify precisely the bat, and so we can collect bats from years to years and see the increasing of the antibody, the lower down of the antibody, and the increasing again, meaning that from infection to infection, some of the bat species can survive. They are exposed. They develop antibodies against the virus, but they survive. So probably they can survive. Are they healthy carriers? This is something else. To be an healthy carrier means to shield the virus, although you don't have any symptoms, and this shielding can be prolonged for quite a long time. So this has never been shown so far, from what I know, in bats. But it doesn't mean that healthy bats cannot be carrier of the virus and shed it for a limited time. This is why when you are exposed to a bat, you should receive a post-exposure prophylaxis. So the next question is, do we have information on the proportion of asymptomatic versus symptomatic Lassa virus infection in bats? So certainly not. It seems that, in fact, when the virus enters a colony, there are not so many bats showing really symptoms of the infection. So we can see stigma of infection through the neutralizing antibodies that are present in the sera of the collected bats, but symptoms we have never seen. But it doesn't mean that they cannot show symptoms, because at least, and this is what happened in Europe, because we have many different bat Lassa viruses circulating in Europe, and we monitor this circulation, and we have some species that we receive in the lab that are dying from some of these bat Lassa viruses. This is the case, for example, of the species 𝐏𝐚𝐬𝐭𝐞𝐮𝐫 𝐌𝐎�𝐻𝐻, which is infected by the European bat Lassa virus subtype 1. I mean, probably 99% of the cases we receive in France infected by the 𝐵LV1 are on a single species, 𝐏𝐚𝐬𝐭𝐞𝐮𝐫 𝐌𝐎�𝐻𝐻, and these bats are found sick and are dying from the infection. So in conclusion, some of the bats may survive of the infection. Some of the bats, some seems to show a peculiar interrelationship with and relationship with their infection, and probably are more prone to be infected and die. But I mean, all the mechanisms that are involved between this resistance to infection or the susceptibility to infection according to the different type of bat Lassa virus circulating is so far not found in bats.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can have a question from the chat related to reservoir. The question is, what animals are the reservoir and can live indefinitely with rabies infection? I think the question is without dying. Is it possible that an animal can live with rabies and without dying?
So as we said, this is expected from some bat species.
Yeah.
So now if we look at non-flying carnivores, there is not so much evidence, but
there is a
probably
question.
some dogs are surviving, but in fact, are they really infected, or do they only receive a challenge dose? I would call that it this way, which was not sufficient to really allow the infection to develop. Or this is questionable.
This is linked to a question which is later on in the chat, if I remember correctly, where people were saying, is it dogs that could be seropositive for rabies without being having that? This has been published in different papers showing that some dogs can be positive and without showing any symptoms. By the way, exactly the same things has been published for Ebola, just to tell you. So you have seropositive dogs. So maybe, as said Hervé, the dose at the level of the biting was sufficiently strong to excite the immune system of healthy dogs having a good response, and maybe not enough to go up to infecting them. Interestingly, one work that we have done in Brazil in the Amazonian forest was after people being bitten by bats, by vampire bats. We followed the people, 500 people that receive a vaccine, a classical vaccine, and we were following indeed the immune response all over the years, how long people are protected after vaccination. And after having looked twice about the people that were enrolled, we enrolled a certain number, you are in the middle of the forest, that were not vaccinated indeed, and they were enrolled. And among those people, which were not very important, it was something like 20 people. Some of those were a bit seropositive for rabies. So this means that eventually it's a possibility to be bitten and to resist. But clearly, when you are bitten, you have to be vaccinated. This is the main message that we can give to the people.
Okay, thank you, Hervé and Noël. And now we can change the category of the questions to talk about human rabies and the pathophysiology of the disease. And one quick question: what's the full range of incubation period of rabies after a dog bite?
I mean, I can start, Hervé, you complete. Normally, when you are going to the textbook, this is, let's say, 2 months of incubation for humans. I think that it is the question is for humans, I think. Yes, it's
for humans. Yeah.
Yes, for humans.
Now it will depend on the place of bites. You know that rabies is dealing with neurons, and so not all the part of the body are innervated by neurons the same way. So this will depend on the place of the bite. This will depends on the virus itself. There were some examples of viruses, if I remember correctly, in Thailand, if I remember correctly, that were very pathogenic and that provoked a very shorter incubation period. And of course, it depends on I would say, the immune status, but the health of the person, and which can also, because rabies is a very good antigen indeed, that could generate also a certain level of protection. So difficult to say global things, but in mean, Hervé, I think it's 2 months in the textbooks. 2 months in the textbooks.
Yeah, so it can be very short. It can be even as short as probably 10 days or even less when you are severely beaten at the face. Even in severe bites at the face, you can have a direct inoculation of the virus into the brain. This may happen through deep wounds, for example, even by wolves. And this has been described. At the opposite, we can have very, very long incubation period, and this has been described in the United States. And this was easy to monitor due to the restrictions and quarantine to introduce animals and people. So the movement of animals and people were quite known, and so by this way, people were able to describe incubation periods of more than 1 year, and I think the longest case was 5 years. Meaning that the virus can survive locally probably at the site of bite for quite a long time and activate its replication and transcription due to a reason which is presently unknown, and then lead to infection a long time after exposure. Meaning that it's never late to get post-exposure prophylaxis. So even if you have been bitten 1 year ago, it's still time to have a post-exposure prophylaxis. What can be discussed is should we use or not immunoglobulins together to the vaccine part of the post-exposure prophylaxis. And in most of the case, if the exposure occurred a long time ago, only the vaccine will be used and not the immunoglobulins. So I hope this will answer the question of the people.
Thank you very much. Always with human rabies, a question about some health measures. Did health measures decrease morbidity rates of human rabies? I think mortality rates, maybe more than morbidity rates.
Well, I'm not sure to understand the question, but one way to answer it is that we can divide probably the risk by 50% just by washing the wound. I don't know if this is what the question is all about, but simply by intensively washing and correctly washing the wound by water and soap during 10 minutes, and this is really well written in the WHO recommendation, you can diminish the probability of infection by 2, which is quite an achievement. So with very simple measures, you can already save a lot of life.
Yeah, I cannot add anything.
And I got a question by one last inscription this afternoon. And the question was about the lethal exposures in dogs, and is dog surviving of rabies? And the question is about is anyone working on understanding why some dogs survive but not others? Do you have an insight if there are dogs surviving of bites from other rabid dogs? This is a question that arrived this afternoon, Hervé. And I think it's in this. It's interesting to tell something about.
Well, I mean, it's the same with humans. I mean, some people are bitten and are not sick, and other ones are sick. I remember 2 people bitten at the same time. One died, and the other one didn't. So it's probably due to the site of injection, so the severity of the bite. It's probably also due to the viral load that was put in that was given to the dog or to the human during the bite. So I mean, you know that the virus is present in the saliva, but then the excretion of the virus is not permanent. So there may be some variation in the load of the virus present in the saliva, and the amount that is inserted in the wound may vary from one bite to another one. So that may explain why when several people are bitten by the same dog and unfortunately not treated and did not receive the post-exposure prophylaxis, some of them died and others did not. But I mean, the general conclusion of that is that everyone that has been bitten should wash intensively the wound and then seek for post-exposure prophylaxis at the nearest clinics and as soon as possible.
Yeah. And the situation is probably the same for dogs in between themselves, which was part of
Yeah.
Thank you, very clear. So now we can move on to the vaccination part. It's a big part. And the first question is, what is the ultimate reason rabies vaccine is not part of general vaccination calendar?
Because it's a neglected disease, we can say, if we want to answer rapidly, but because it's not the same pressure in different countries. Here, because we came in Guinea, indeed, vaccine was rabies was considered as a second disease. People do not, there are not good data about that. Now, there are some places, for example, in Latin America, in Peru, where people have started to make automatic vaccination of young children when they are in a region at risk, particularly in the Amazonian forest. So this has been supported, as usual, it has been supported first by a company, by the vaccine company, and then followed by the government. So there are some cases like that exist where children are primed. Maybe not in a full range, but they are primed in order to be better prepared in case of biting. But this is not a general thing that we have tried to push, but for the moment it's not in the calendar. And maybe depending on the country or depending on the region, we have to promote awareness among the politicians, among the deciders, in order to have this type of situation repeated. Hervé?
Yeah, if I may complete, so it's highly dependent of the incidence of rabies in the geographical area that is considered. And the second important point is the accessibility of this population to the nearest rabies clinic. Otherwise, we know that what is the most cheapest and efficient way to stop rabies is to vaccinate dogs. So this is what is really recommended now. Put more effort on the vaccination of dogs to save life in dogs for sure, but to save life finally in humans. And this is an efficient way in the middle and long term. Although vaccinated humans is only an efficient way in the very short term of the disease. It will never change the epidemiology of the disease as the virus will stay in its reservoir host. Okay, so beside that, and considering the fact that there are some populations that are very far from a rabies clinic and in which the incidence is very high, it was considered that by WHO experts that in fact general vaccination of children in these populations, general vaccination extended to rabies could be considered. And as Noël said, it was experimentally tested in some Amazonian regions. But so far, it is not recommended in any other part of the world.
One of the main problem is that, as you said, Hervé, it is in a region where you have a high incidence of rabies. The problem is that in many countries, for example, in Africa, it's very difficult to have an idea of the real incidence of rabies. And this is one of the problems. And this is the reason why I was talking about politician willingness to have more reliable data.
Okay, and still on prophylaxis, but now related to bats. If somebody take a bat in his hands, but no scratch and no bite, is it an indication for prophylaxis?
No bite, nothing.
Well, usually, I mean, if you look at WHO recommendation, if you handle the bat, you should go for an advice, a medical advice, and in most of the case, you will receive a post-exposure prophylaxis. If you are in the US, you will receive at 100%. In Europe, it may be discussed, but yes, because we consider that exposure to bat is shouldn't be considered as exposure to dogs, in the fact that sometimes scratch or bites of bats are not so well characterized or perceived by the people. So you may be bitten or scratched without even knowing it. So we consider that handling a bat is an indication for prophylaxis.
This old story about the young boy dying in the US from rabies from bats. The parents saw the bat flying in the room in the morning. They knew about rabies. They put the child to the doctor. The doctor examined the child. The child had no test, no trace of being bitten. So they did nothing, and finally the child died from rabies because it was an insectivorous bat, and the holes that you can see on observation were very, very short. So be careful with bats, because you can have you can be into contact without being so evidently than with dog, for example.
Thank you. Next question is about PEP failure, if it's possible. And the question is, what are the possible reasons for rabies death after a full PEP along with local wound care in an immunocompetent person?
Okay, maybe I'll take that one. So there are several reasons for. So first of all, there are failures that could be considered as real failures or breakthrough, and others that are not. Meaning that, in fact, if you look carefully at the case, it didn't follow the fully the recommendations. So we maybe start by this category. If the bite is treated too late after exposure, if the bite is, for example, sutured before injection of the rabies immunoglobulin, if the bite is not washed intensively with water and soap, these are reasons for failures, but that are not real breakthrough, because these are all these measures are parts of the recommendation. You should wait to suture the wound for the injection of the serotherapy. You should not wait too long to get your post-exposure prophylaxis, and you should wash intensively your wounds. So this is probably the major parts of the so-called failures. So what are the real breakthrough? There are only a very few breakthroughs that have been described, and this is why, in fact, we are very confident with the WHO recommendations in terms of post-exposure prophylaxis. And sometimes it's little questions of delay between the bite and the patient taken in charge by the anti-rabies clinic, which was not done the same day, but was done 1 or 2 days later, although there were several very severe bites at the face. And of course, in these cases where you are severely bitten, a very efficient way of infection and very close to the brain, the quickest you receive the post-exposure prophylaxis, the more chance you will have to survive. So do not forget these two categories. And do not forget that if you follow carefully the WHO recommendation, in fact, the real breakthroughs are very, very limited, and we are very close, if not at 100% of efficacy of the post if you associate the vaccine and the immunoglobulins. So I must emphasize the fact that in category 3 bites, if the immunoglobulins are not associated to the vaccine, then it's also a major cause of breakthrough or failures. But this is not a breakthrough because here again, immunoglobulins should be injected, and this is part of the recommendations.
But indeed, just to add, we have also to verify that the quality of the vaccine, which is, so we presume that all the vaccine were well, but it's not all the case, all the time the case. And in some countries, close to say in some continents, like in Africa, indeed, rabies immunoglobulin are simply not available in the country. And this is a main problem. That's it.
Thank you for the answers. And Hervé, you talked about category 3 bites. And in this case, a very high risk of rabies transmission. Are there any drugs that can assist in the prevention of rabies to be added in to the post-exposure prophylaxis?
Also, for those that follow the MOOC from the start to the end, they should be able to answer this question. I mean, in terms of research, there are a lot of activities going on around the development of therapies using many types of different molecules or antibodies. But so far, I mean, the only recommended products follow the WHO recommendation and are composed of the vaccine, good quality vaccine produced on cell culture, and the rabies immunoglobulin that should be associated in category 3. But there is no other products that compare to immunoglobulins and should be associated to the vaccine to replace the immunoglobulins. So there are, as you have seen during the MOOC, there are several types of rabies immunoglobulins. This can be of equine, human origin. Some new products are monoclonal antibodies. So all of them are their interests and drawbacks. And this is addressed in the MOOC. So you know that perfectly well now, but there is nothing to replace these products.
Thank you. Now a question from Philippines. How do we treat rabies in remote areas where there are no vaccines?
Not easy.
One.
This is the major problem of the accessibility of rural areas and poor population to the vaccine. And this is a main issue in rabies. And this is what we are, most of us, working on. It's unbelievable today that people have to travel for hundreds or even sometimes thousands of kilometers to be able to get their shoot of vaccine. So we are working on that, as I said, in the terms of operational research studies to help the different governments and ministries to set up a network of anti-rabies clinics in their countries. And there are countries doing that quite well. There are countries that are in progress. And of course, when you are living in the Philippines, in a country with so many islands, this is difficult to have an anti-rabies center. But I think there are ways to help the people to get their vaccine in the next 24 or 48 hours after their exposure. This is the objective, that anyone should be able to get in the next 24 or 48 hours, not too far from his living place, the post-exposure prophylaxis.
But something that I have to add is that when the way the question is mentioned, Yes, there is even people here that are going to traditional medicine, etc. And what Hervé said is true. We have to find the way to administer vaccines the more closer than where the people are, because traditional medicine is not working for rabies. I think that we can do that even if you have people knowing plants. It is not the case. It happens here in Guinea. So this is the reason why it's very important to deliver the vaccines at the right place, at the right moment, which effectively necessitate to have good contacts with the politicians, the government, because as I said before, if the vaccine arrive and there you have no cold chain, it's not really good also. So this is one of the big tasks.
Yes, I would say that what we call Occidental medicine is not against traditional healers or traditional medicine, but so far the traditional medicine and all the way they use to treat rabies has not been shown to be efficient. So we are working on the accessibility of these poor and rural populations to the rabies vaccine. The one way I could complete that is by one way, which is very cheap, is simply, as I said before, to wash the wound with water and soap, which is very efficient.
Of course.
Okay, thank you. And just to close this block of questions on vaccine, Hervé and Noël, are there any rabies virus strains escaping from existing vaccines?
There are Lissa viruses that are provoking rabies. Okay, not all the Lissa viruses are covered by the classical rabies vaccine, even if, I mean, those that are on the market, I would say, even if some effort have been done since, we can say, decades to try to enlarge the protection spectrum of the anti-rabies vaccine toward anti-Lissa virus vaccine. But the other Lissa viruses are usually, when we are talking about dog rabies, which is something like more than 99% of the human cases, this is classical rabies, which is totally covered by the classical vaccine. If we are starting to talk about Lissa viruses that are divergent, some of those have been shown to make human cases, but not all. Some have been found only on animals. Of course, these vaccines do not protect these very distant Lissa viruses, but in terms of public health, it's a limited number. So better to focus on controlling dog rabies, which has been beautifully done, for example, in Americas, in order to decrease the human risk.
Thank you very much, Noël. Then now about control of rabies, the first question is, what does it take to bring free rabies vaccination campaigns? I think it's about dog vaccination campaigns to one's country. And how can I get grants to promote rabies prevention lessons to school kids? It's a question from Kenya.
So this is a participative politics that we are trying to do here in Guinea and many places in Africa, so to improve awareness of the people against rabies. Indeed, in all communities, people know about rabies. They know rabies. Rabies is a known disease. Most of the children are controlled by their parents not to touch dogs, etc. So this is something which is very well known by the community. But together with that, there is necessity to increase awareness. And because I said it's not a priority in many countries, and many countries in Africa where the death is a normal part of the life. It's not considered like we are doing in Europe, for example. What we are trying to do, and I'm just talking about awareness here in Guinea, is to develop, for example, a theater piece in order making the children as the main role to try to put that in the different villages and to show and to talk about rabies with personages that can be dogs. Some people are playing the dogs, some people are playing the children and the adult. And this is one of the things which is well functioning, which can function very well in order to increase awareness. After, if the question is concerning vaccine campaigns in terms of money, if because you can read the question in two parts. This is a permanent situation. I mean, I hope that removing rabies horizon 2031 will help some WHO, WHA, I would say, and FAO to bring vaccine libraries, and some vaccine libraries have been done for dogs, for example, by OIE and WHA. And so this has been to be continued, because many countries where the problem of dog rabies is prominent are not the mean to pay for so expensive vaccinations.
Maybe I can complete a little bit. So vaccination in dogs is far cheaper than vaccination in humans. So protection of the dog population is cheaper and most efficient. So this is the only way to go. So the major problem is to see the control and elimination of rabies in One Health framework, where I mean the amount of money that is saved from the human sector could really be invested to help the animal sector to provide the funding for the vaccination of dogs. So it's a global strategy. It's sometimes difficult to be promoted in resource-limited countries, but this is the way to go. Think of it in a One Health framework, and really exchange between the sector to be able to bring these dog vaccination campaigns in the field. And then the next question was, oh, can I get grants to promote rabies prevention lessons to school kids? I'm not sure grants are needed. There are a lot of people doing that in Africa. There are a lot of supports for kids that are already available. And if you work in Kenya, there are many English-speaking manual that could be used already. They are available. You can ask GARC for that, Global Alliance for Rabies. They have got a lot of materials that are available. And again, kids and community participation is a major pillar in the success of the rabies elimination programs in the different countries. So it's I would encourage you to pursue your activities in terms of information of the children and the mobilization of the communities. This is really very important.
By the way, just to complete, in the Americas, the way rabies was almost eliminated from dogs has been linked to the fact that they put together the veterinary offices and the human offices, and in a real One Health. Before we were talking about One Health, this is in the 90s and 2000, and this is the only way to do. Sometimes difficult because these different political organizations are not biting at the same grounds, and this is what can be the problem. This is the reason why rabies, in terms of One Health, is really a sort of demonstration that One Health can help to solve a problem.
Okay, thank you, Noël, Hervé. And about dog population, what practical ways can you propose to manage dog populations for rabies control in a place where the dogs roam freely in the community? This is a question for Nigeria.
It's a question from Africa. Indeed, Nigeria.
Okay, dog population management is a key issue. So the notion of restriction of movement of dogs is really important. So you have several categories of dogs. community dogs, real feral dogs, or free roaming dogs. These are not the same types of dogs. So some of them have a clear owner, even if they can free roam by night, but they have a house and an owner. And the limitation of the movement of dogs really limit the propagation of the virus. So this is well known, as this has been demonstrated. Put the dog in leash and limit the movement of dogs is a clear way to limit the spreading of the disease. Then probably the question is more about nurturing of the dog population or killing of the free roaming dogs. So stamping out the free roaming dogs has never been very efficient. This has been done for many years in many places and big cities. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money without a lot of success, because if you will fairly easily understand, if the host capacity of the habitat is remain the same, then the population, which has been diminished in terms of numbers, reproduce very fast after the killing and the stamping out of a part of the population, because they can feed easily, and so the level of the population is restored in a very limited time. So this is not the way to go, and this is not anymore recommended except in very specific circumstances. So nurturing of the population can be a complementary measures to vaccination of dogs, but here again, it's consuming in terms of time and expertise. Surgery nurturing is difficult and takes time, and there are chemical ways of nurturing animals, but so far the effect has been limited, and so most of the energy now is focusing on the vaccination alone. Yeah. Of dogs, I mean.
Thank you, both of you. The next question is rabies complete eradication possible?
Not now. Not now. Eradication.
Well, in defined geographical settings, this has been shown already. There are a good showcase of rabies elimination. Probably the most important one is in KwaZulu-Natal, where during 2 to 3 years there were no more cases, but due to shortening of the fundings, the campaigns of vaccination had to stop, and then rabies came again. Another example was in a work performed by our colleague Jacob Zinstag from Swiss TPH in Chad, in N'Djamena, the capital city of Chad. And there, after 2 campaigns of vaccination, the rabies was completely eliminated from the city of N'Djamena. So now the issue is really to demonstrate that it is feasible at a larger scale, at a country level or at a sub-regional or continental level. This is achievable. We have all the means. We have the knowledge for that. What is meaning is the willingness and the cooperation between the countries. So willingness within each of the different countries and cooperation between the different countries to limit the reintroduction of cases from neighboring countries. That said, the objective of 0 human deaths by 2030 is still achievable, and we are all still working with that in mind. And there are a lot of activities going on rabies now, not only in Latin America, which did a lot already in the past, but also in Asia, who is quite well advanced in some countries, but no more in Africa. And there are a lot of African countries that are moving and trying to reach this objective. And we will see where we will be standing by these dates.
just to complete, if we want to just reply orthodoxically to the question, eradication is a disparition from the world. This is not for today.
Elle, on t'entend pas. Tu as le micro coupé.
Okay.
Pardon,
No,
je n'entendais pas, moi.
No.
Okay.
No, it's eradication means disparition from the world. So if we are replying orthodoxically to the question, no, the eradication of rabies is not for today, because you have rabies in bats and you can have some bats that are transmitting to others. A local elimination and good elimination, as mentioned by Hervé, as some good example. And I would like to come back on the previous one of the previous question, where the first things to do is to know about dogs, for example, what is the situation of your dog population in your place where you would like to eliminate dog rabies. And in many cases in Africa, it depends. For example, in Guinea, we have regions that are more Muslim and regions that are more Christians. And in these regions, the behavior in front of dogs is not the same. So we have to make some specific studies in order to see the ratio human dogs and the behavior of the people for that. But yes, it's possible to eliminate dog rabies from region. It has been done in the old times in Europe. It has been well started in Americas. We did even better in Europe, since I was not involved, but people succeeded to remove fox rabies, which is a wild animal from Western Europe. So yes, there are some means to eliminate rabies from places, for sure. And dogs is by vaccination.
Thank you, Noël, Hervé. And we are approaching the end of the webinar, so I'll mix two questions in one. And this question is about vaccination and vaccines specifically. And if you can comment about the different brands of anti-rabies vaccines or different types of vaccines, like the viral vaccines produced in viral cells and chicken embryo, and the role of newer anti-rabies vaccines and their use on rabies post-exposure prophylaxis.
Indeed, to be used for human use, a vaccine has to be pre-qualified by WHO. I mean, to be recognized by WHO. And there are other. So this is the main brands that we know. If someone is developing another vaccine and wants to be recognized by WHO, it has to go through these rules. There are other brands that could be used in country that are eventually not recognized on the place to be. So this is basically the way. For animals. There is more inventivity, more variability of strains that are used for vaccination. Now, if we are going to the end, yes, there is a big effort now to find new methodologies to have new vaccines. This was the case, for example, for COVID, RNA vaccine and DNA vaccine have been developed a lot, what was present in the rabies book since a long term, but now people are trying to use this vaccine. For the moment, they are not on the market, but there are some progress. And as I said before, it could be eventually interesting to increase the spectrum of the vaccine in the end, but once we will have solved the problem of dog rabies in the world, to make anti-rabies vaccine, anti-Lissa virus vaccines. I'm stopping there because I think that all the people are moving in any directions. Sorry. Yes?
Maybe part of the question was about the way we could start the post-exposure prophylaxis using one of the brand and then move to another brand in the same course of the post-exposure prophylaxis. So this has been addressed by the WHO expert committee. And for of course, the vaccines that are recommended by WHO, you can start with one type of vaccine and end with another type without any problem. This is very often the case with people traveling and getting their initial dose of post-exposure prophylaxis in one country. Mainly, I'm thinking of tourists, and then coming back in their original country, asking for the rest of the post-exposure prophylaxis, and sometimes the vaccine may be different there. So there is no problem to change the type of vaccines during the post-exposure prophylaxis, if this was part of the question.
Thank you. We can have a few more questions, but it's nearly the end of the webinar. So maybe to conclude with the perspective in rabies, what will be the role of One Health in rabies elimination? Who will be the primary stakeholders for dog-mediated rabies elimination? And I don't know from which country is the question. I'm sorry.
So, I mean, this has been exemplified all along the MOOC and this webinar. One Health is the major issue. If we are not working with the One Health approach, we will never reach the dog rabies control in humans by 2030. This is sure, because it will cost a lot of money and it will not be very efficient. One Health is really the key issue. And the next question is, who will be the primary stakeholders? I mean, I would say we really don't mind. If it's done in the One Health concept, then what is organized in countries working through the One Health concept is a kind of a committee which is handling all the issues related to zoonosis. So it can be a zoonotic platform, a zoonotic committee, a One Health committee, an intersectorial platform. There are many names that are given to this type of committees, and these committees are composed of people working for Ministry of Health, Ministry of Livestock, Ministry of Interior Affairs, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Communication, and all you can imagine. Of course, environmental conditions and forest and etc. And these committees address the problem of zoonotic infections, and define who is the primary stakeholders if there is a need for defining the primary stakeholders. But it should be multi-sectorial, multidisciplinary committee acting in relation with the different ministries of the country. This is the best way to go.
And for this, the One Health platform that are grown in different countries and that place together these different people from different ministries are really very important to realize. This is what will make the things functional.
Okay, so we'll have time to ask a few less questions on the question and answer box that you asked directly for us. And I have one about human people surviving of rabies. And there's one, you talked of the young girl who was exposed to a bat and who survived after receiving the Milwaukee Protocol. Donc, I think it was the first part of Milwaukee Protocol success. And can you tell us about other humans surviving after having developed symptoms after an exposure to a rabid dog and not bat rabies? Do you have insights about people surviving from after dogs bite?
So there are there are several reports describing survivals from rabies in humans. So the most famous one is this woman treated by the Milwaukee Protocol. And after that, this protocol was applied to some other cases in the Americas. And the context here is a bit different, as it was mentioned by Guilherme. These people were bitten and exposed to bats. So they were exposed to bat Lissa viruses. And probably it changed a little bit the relationship between the virus and the host. And these strains are a bit different from what the dog rabies virus are. Whatever, this protocol was spread out of the Americas and used in other countries with a very more limited success. There are a few cases recorded in India, and there are good publications describing them. I know there are several cases of survival that have been described. So this survival are in fact considered as survival on the following basis. In fact, classical rabies diagnosis was never performed in these people. It was an indirect evidence of virus infection through the testing of antibodies and high titers of antibodies without receiving any post-exposure prophylaxis after survival. So this was the only indicator of rabies exposure. But for some of them, considering the very high titers of antibodies in the CSF, we can be quite confident that these people were really infected by rabies and not by something else. The condition, what about the clinical condition of this survival? Sometimes and in the case of this famous case I told you about, treated by the Milwaukee protocol after an exposure to bats in Northern America, this lady is completely normal and behave normally now. In the cases bitten by dogs, I mean, the issue is less good. And these people are not so well performing, and most of them are remain quite sick and have a lot of sequelae. So, in conclusion, the percentage of survival is very, very, very low. Major point. Second, the sequelae are in these people heavy and important. And the third point is that so far the Milwaukee protocol and all its derivatives have only been proven effective in the context of bat exposure in the Americas, and all the use that have been performed outside this context led to a rate of success that are not so much different from what was known before. And I think I will stop here in this explanation.
Okay, thank you. So maybe the last question, in your opinion, what is the hottest research area in rabies field right now? So maybe your opinion will be different between Noël and Hervé. We will be happy to have your answer, both of you.
I mean, for me,
Noël, do you want to start?
For me, the hottest, I mean, the more future research that we can have is, of course, to try to treat declared rabies, so meaning able, because we are giving a vaccine which is a post-exposure prophylaxis, so it's already a treatment, if we can say, but it's still producing or giving antibodies sufficiently early to avoid the virus to infect the nervous system. Once the virus is in the nervous system, up to now, it's very difficult to do something. And this is a reason that many people, Hervé and I, we participate to that, are trying to find ways to introduce antibodies in the CNS, or to use molecules that are blocking some Achilles of the virus at the level of the polymerase. And people that have followed the MOOC can have some example. So in my opinion, this is a more exciting for scientists, and because it forces us to understand how the virus is functioning first, And it is also the most powerful in ants for public health. Now, I'm living in a country where rabies is killing a certain number of people. We do not know exactly how many people because we have not real data, but there are people dying from rabies in Guinea. And here, one of the most important urgent things to do is to use a One Health approach, vaccinate dogs, protect, which is the best way to protect humans. And as I would say, and this allows you to make research on peacetime, because once you have things to solve and to remove a country from a rabies situation is the urgency, and you are never very good at thinking in the urgency. So doing that, and the more interesting would be to treat declared rabies for me.
Okay, well, for me, the big issue is the treatment of infected patients after the onset of the symptoms, and this is one of the major topic of research of our unit, how to be able to bring a therapy for these people. For this, we need to understand more of the pathogenesis of the disease, and understand the early step of the disease, and be able to block the spreading of the virus. So this is not an easy issue. So this is for me the research issue, but in terms of implementation, and I will really follow the lines and what Noël said. In terms of implementation, what we have to understand now and help the countries to do is to find the easiest, cheapest way to vaccinate as much dog as possible and identify the source of spreading of the diseases in the different countries. It means to monitor very precisely the epidemiology of rabies in the different countries to save time and money. I'm definitely confident that in most of the countries, after 2 to 3 years, with regular vaccination programs, we could really eliminate 80–99% of the cases in dogs, which is a good result. First step of elimination. Then the next step that will be to find the ultimate rabies infected dogs will be probably more difficult and will require a lot of investigation. But let us start with the first cases to reduce the incidence in dogs by 80–90%. And this could be achievable in 2 to 3 years from now, with a large mobilization of the veterinary sectors and human sectors in the different countries. I mean, in most of the countries where we are with whom we are working, all the infrastructure, competent personnel are there. It's just a problem of willingness and engagement from the national authorities and the politicians. So this is what we are trying to do and working on in connection with the international organization, is to sensitize, to mobilize the communities, to attract the attention of the donors, but also of the politicians in the different countries.
Thank you very much, Hervé. Thank you very much, Noël. Thank you all again for participating in this webinar. Thank you for all your very interesting questions. The recording will be available soon on the Institut Pasteur Education YouTube channel.
Yeah, and if you have remaining questions, you can ask them directly on the MOOC. Then Perrine and myself will respond to them directly there. And I would like to remind you that the MOOC qualifying exam will take place between January 3rd and February 13th. And you can still register to take this exam and to obtain an authenticated certificate. And it's also possible to obtain the Institut Pasteur online diploma in infectious disease once you have validated 5 MOOCs within 2 years. And to that, I'd like also to thank to Cécile Troupin, the MOOC coordinator, and also for Institute Pasteur Education, Clementine, Schilte, and Leonardo for helping us with this webinar. And thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.